Man, the last thing I expected when I went back to my hometown was to get hit with a wave of adrenaline and terror. After years away, I decided to pay a visit. The place had changed a lot, but I still remembered my old graffiti days. There was this stretch of old tracks I used to hop on to catch trains and do some graffiti. It was a way to feel free and out of the ordinary, and I was itching to relive that feeling. So off I went. I caught a train that ran along those old tracks, and in a fit of nostalgia, I climbed up into the cargo area of an abandoned car. It was all rusty and damp, but the view of the tracks ahead was perfect. As the train started moving, the sound of the wheels and the wind hitting me brought a rush of nostalgia. Everything was just as I remembered, or so I thought. I felt like I was young again, like time had rewound to those crazy days of my life. Things got seriously weird when the train entered a tunnel. You know that moment when everything goes dark and silent? That's exactly what happened. I was just chilling, enjoying the ride, when I started hearing this strange noise. It wasn't the train. It was like someone was trying to get into the car. I got up and started looking around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. And then, out of nowhere, I felt these invisible hands trying to pull me out, like something was trying to drag me off the train. My heart skipped a beat, and I almost lost it. The feeling was horrific. It wasn't just a hand, it felt like multiple hands, or at least that's what it seemed like. I was gripped with fear and realized I was in serious trouble. In a panic, I started banging on the door, shouting, and making as much noise as I could. I figured if I caused enough of a ruckus, these hands would back off. It got even scarier when I realized it wasn't just the noise that was freaking me out. I could feel that something or someone was trying to get into the car at all costs. Every creak and movement made me think the worst was coming. Finally, the tunnel started ending and the light came back. I was completely rattled, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. The train came out of the tunnel, and I realized I was still alive. With my legs shaking and cold sweat dripping down my face, I looked back to see what was scaring me. And that's when I saw it, strange shadows in the tunnel, like someone was watching me. I couldn't make out what they were, but they were there, dark and menacing. I jumped off the train as fast as I could, and from that moment on, I knew I was never going back to those tracks. The fear and adrenaline had been too much. The town seemed normal, but I felt something had changed. I had narrowly escaped a completely insane situation, and the experience left its mark on me. This whole thing was a brutal lesson about what's really lurking in the shadows and made me realize that nostalgia can come with a steep price. No matter how much you want to relive the past, some things are better left behind. And so, with a silent vow and a pounding heart, I left the tracks behind, determined never to get caught up in that kind of adventure again. That night seemed perfect for a little escape to do something we both loved. Lucas and I, with our spray paints and a desire to turn an old train into a piece of art, headed to a secluded railroad. We knew it was a quiet spot, away from the city, where we could be alone and do our art without interruptions. It was cold, and the full moon cast a silver glow on the rusty tracks. The train, a giant rust bucket covered in graffiti, was our canvas. We cracked open our spray cans and started working on what we hoped would be our best mural yet. The night was peaceful, until a strange noise broke the silence. It was a metallic sound, like something being dragged. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or some animal, but Lucas was clearly on edge. He looked up and scanned the area, his body tense. "Didn't you hear that?" he asked, trying to hide his nervousness. I laughed it off, saying it was just the night playing tricks on us, but I couldn't deny the growing sense that something was off. What happened next was pure chaos and adrenaline. The noise turned into shouting, and before we could react, a man appeared out of nowhere. He was barefoot and wearing ragged clothes, with a crazy look in his eyes that made us feel like we were in a horror movie. The guy started yelling and, without warning, threw a can of paint at us. The green, gooey paint hit Lucas, who swore loudly and tried to clean himself off. I tried to run, but the guy seemed possessed, chasing us and shooting into the air with a gun. Panic set in. My heart was pounding, and I had no idea where to run. Lucas and I bolted down the tracks, leaping over rails and bushes, while the lunatic kept yelling and shooting. Every step felt like an eternity, and the adrenaline made us run faster than I thought possible. Finally, we found a hiding spot among some trees and stopped to catch our breath, the sound of our heartbeats still ringing in our ears. After the night of terror, morning came with a bitter taste. We were both exhausted and traumatized, but decided to go back to see if there was anything left to salvage. The area felt different, almost like it was daring us to return. The train was still there, but what we found was a gut punch. Our artwork had been completely destroyed. Someone had covered our painting with black paint, and the words and images we had created were unrecognizable. We decided to go inside the car to see if anything was left behind, and what we found was even more disturbing. The inside was a mess, with personal items scattered around and a foul smell that made you want to puke. There were strange stains and a torn piece of fabric thrown in the corner. No one was around, but the feeling that something terrible had happened in that train was palpable. I looked at Lucas and saw he was as shaken as I was. The experience had been more than just scary, it was a nightmare. The thought that the crazy guy might still be around or that there was a dark reason behind what we found made the situation even more distressing. The sense that something bad was about to happen never left me, and even after we got out of there, the thought that our art was ruined and the train was now tied to such a deep trauma haunted me. I never looked at an old train the same way again. So there I was, alone on the night shift at the Brooklyn subway station. The place was almost empty, with only the occasional distant sound of a train passing by. It was the deadest part of the day, and I was stuck doing routine maintenance. There was no one around to chat with, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Silence is golden when you're trying to get through boring tasks. But that silence was shattered by something that made me stop and listen. At first, I thought it was just my head playing tricks on me, but then I clearly heard a whisper, a child's voice calling for help. The sound seemed to come from one of the dark tunnels, the kind of place you avoid by instinct. My heart started racing. Shit, I thought. Is someone in trouble here? I headed toward the tunnel with a chill creeping up my spine. Every step echoed off the empty walls, and the beam from my flashlight barely reached the end of the tunnel. The whisper was getting fainter, almost like it was moving away, but I could still hear it. The atmosphere was thick, and the air felt heavy, like something was pressing against my chest. I had no idea what was going on, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. When I reached the end of the tunnel, the discomfort became unbearable. The light from my flashlight barely cut through the darkness surrounding me. The child's voice had disappeared, and the silence was so profound it felt like it was smothering me. I stood there, frozen, and that's when something moved. A quick, shadowy figure made my heart nearly jump out of my chest. The shadow seemed to shift and take form. I couldn't make out what it was clearly, but it looked like a human silhouette, tall and threatening. The presence was so oppressive you could feel the weight in the air. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but all I could think about was getting out of there as fast as possible. I sprinted back to the well-lit area of the station, my heart pounding wildly. Every shadow and every noise seemed amplified as I felt like something was following me. It was like the shadow had an invisible force pushing me out of that tunnel. I finally made it back to the safety of the maintenance room and sat down, trying to catch my breath and compose myself. I reported the incident to my boss, and of course, the police had to come in. They arrived and started investigating the tunnel, asking me about what I had seen. I described everything I could, the voice, the shadow, the feeling of being watched. The police searched the tunnel, and I watched from a distance, trying not to look like an idiot. They didn't find anything. No clues, no traces, nothing. I felt frustrated and powerless. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just an illusion or a trick of the light, but I knew what I had felt. The feeling that something was wrong still lingered. I left the station that night with a sense of unease that never quite went away. What was that shadow? And why was there a child's voice there? There was something more in that station, something that was never uncovered. The fear of not knowing the truth was the worst part, and that sense of discomfort still haunts me. There was no conclusion to my experience, only the knowledge that something terrifying happened that night, and I would never truly know what it was.